og tvinger lønnen ned. Det siger den amerikanske økonom, professor George Borjas, der i denne uge besøgte Danmark. Og hans budskab er, at politikerne både kan og skal styre indvandringen.
Indvandring er nødvendigt. I Europa som i USA og Japan, hvor færre unge skal forsørge flere ældre. I Danmark er antallet af indvandrere steget. Det viser helt friske tal. I 2004 kom godt 50.000 indvandrere til Danmark, og i 2007 var tallet 64.656. Mange af indvandrerne er folk fra europæiske lande, der kommer for at arbejde. Men til gengæld er flygtningestrømmen som bekendt blevet stærkt reduceret. Danmark demonstrerer altså, at det er muligt at kontrollere grænserne. Og ifølge den amerikanske professor George Borjas er det afgørende, at et samfund ikke bare åbner dørene på vid gab, men tværtimod sorterer omhyggeligt i, hvem der skal lukkes indenfor. Man skal have lov til at vælge, hvem der vil bidrage med den størst mulige økonomiske gevinst.
Good evening, Professor Borjas, and welcome to Deadline. Thank you so much for joining us.
Now, thank you very much.
Soon to be 10 years since you published Heaven's Door.
Exactly.
Yes. And what has changed in the immigration debate in the U.S.?
I think two things have changed. One is, in my book, I didn't really stress the issue of illegal immigration that much.
Right.
And there has been an explosion of the number of illegal immigrants since the book was published. So I think when the book was published, there might have been maybe 3 or 4 million illegal immigrants living in the U.S. So I didn't really address the issue that much because they have been taken care of, presumably, 10 years earlier with an amnesty that was given out in the late 1980s.
Yes.
But now we have 12, 13 million illegal immigrants, and the book didn't really address that issue at all. The second thing that has changed is that when the book was published, the policy proposal that the book basically makes is that if a country really wants to benefit from immigration economically, it should be pursuing a policy that admits or that encourages high-skilled immigration. At the time when the book came out, that policy to a lot of people seemed un-American, because that's not the way America is filtering people by skill. And that, the usual argument that people you would have made was, well, my grandparents wouldn't have come in under that policy, thinking of the Great Migration in the U.S. at the beginning of the 20th century. Since the book was published, however, it's much more in the common discourse that maybe the U.S. should be thinking about high-skilled immigration. And in fact, as you probably know, there was a big debate in the U.S. over immigration last year, and over guest workers, over amnesty. And a little-known fact of that the Senate bill that was debated was that it would have actually instituted a point system to filter by skills for illegal immigrants. So it's actually part of the debate right now.
Yes, and this is, of course, is one of your recommendations.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
And of course, what you are saying essentially is if I am a low-skilled worker and I have few skills and I don't earn very much money, it's rational for me to be afraid of Mexicans or who are coming in and taking my job away from me, isn't it?
Well, look, so the law of supply and demand holds in the following sense. I mean, for example, take in Denmark. If Denmark instituted a policy that admitted 10,000 journalists a year, people in this building wouldn't be very happy about it.
No.
And that's exactly
people in this building aren't very happy to begin with. So
that might be true in any case, but even be less happier.
Yes.
Well, what the U.S. has done basically is admit 10, 15 million low-skilled immigrants.
Yes.
There are many low-skilled workers already living in the U.S., many of whom are actually immigrants themselves, earlier generations of immigrants. And a lot of minorities, African-American in particular, who happen to be low-skilled for many reasons. What you're now doing is making the job market harder for them, tighter market, harder for them to get jobs, lower wages. So of course they would feel that it's not a good policy for them.
And so what you're saying essentially is it may not necessarily be about prejudice and racism. It could just be about pure sort of socioeconomic interest.
Precisely. I mean, if you think about what low-skill immigration does, it basically redistributes wealth. Immigration. It's a good way to think about it as another redistribution program. When you admit a lot of low-skilled immigrants, low-skilled workers in the country will tend to lose a little bit. People who use those low-skilled workers will tend to gain a lot. And it's really a redistribution of wealth from low-skilled workers to people who use them, namely employers.
But I can imagine an economist who will say, well, look, I mean, open borders, that's just a way of creating a more imperfect or less imperfect labor market in a sense. We're just sort of removing barriers, we're letting the economists work together and do their own thing. And so eventually there will be growth and there will be greater wealth, and that will come back to benefit everyone.
There will be growth at a cost. And the cost is, what do you do about the low-skilled workers already there who are going to be competing with millions of people who are going to come to the U.S.? Let me give you an example of the demand for entering to the U.S. The U.S. raffles about 50,000 lotteries a year. Literally, there's a lottery that 50,000 visas a year. There's a lottery that you can apply, and if you win, you get a green card. You get a permanent resident visa into the U.S. Roughly speaking, we get between 8 and 10 million applications for 50,000 slots. So the demand for entering to the U.S. is huge. So if we were to have open borders, there'd be a lot of people coming into the U.S. Many of them will be low-skilled, and you have to worry about what happens to the low-skilled workers already there. That's number one. Number two, Milton Friedman has actually a great quote about this. It is not possible to have open immigration in a welfare state. I mean, the fact of the matter is the U.S., as wealthy as it is, could not possibly afford to extend its welfare system as ungenerous as it is by European standards to people from all over the world.
But some people will say, well, look, it's about growth again. I mean, never mind the welfare system such as it is. In the US, let's just let the market work. And we will take in immigrants, and some of them will, get more skills, and they will move up the ladder. And so eventually everything will come back.
It doesn't quite work that easily, okay? And the fact of the matter is that it won't. I mean, the welfare state in particular is actually a big obstacle to that. Somebody has to pay for the health, education costs of these individuals that are going to come in. If a lot of them are low-skilled, it will cost something, and who's going to pay for that?
But what about the argument that the low-skilled workers, they will be, under pressure anyway, because if you don't allow cheap labor into the US or into Europe, what you're going to have is outsourcing. So you're just going to have their jobs moved to China.
And that is partly true. Many jobs can, in fact, move to China, but many jobs can't. A lot of the low-skilled immigrants in the US actually work in the service sector. You cannot really move out to China driving a cab. You cannot move to China cleaning a hotel room. And the people who would have done those jobs are going to suffer.
But I mean, you can hold back the tide of immigration, but won't those people with fewer skills, won't they have to move up the competence ladder anyway? I mean, won't they have to get smarter and start moving? Isn't it just a matter of getting started?
But the question is it easier for people to move up when there's less competition in order for the jobs? Or does it make it harder when, in fact, you can barely find a job that pays a minimum wage or something like that?
Now, you mentioned illegal immigration, and of course this is interesting in the US. I mean, you had the debate last year, but there seems to be an issue here that for many people is a huge reality and a huge burning concern. And when you look at public debate and public discourse, it's not really there in the manner, at least that the critics would expect.
You mean in the US?
Yes.
Well, in the US, the immigration debate is, how should I put this, is guided by a lot of political correctness.
Yes.
So one has to be very careful in how one frames the debate and the questions that are answered. And the issue of race and immigration are intertwined, which makes it very difficult for a politician in particular to speak honestly and rationally about what kind of policy it should be pursuing.
And when you have critics of immigration, for instance, in the Republican Party who say, well, you have President Bush, you have Senator John McCain, you have the Wall Street Journal, they're all arguing for open borders, and this is because they're part of a wealthy men's club, essentially, and they're just interested in what big business
The Republican Party, beneficiaries of the Republican Party, a lot of them happen to be employers.
Yes.
And the Wall Street Journal in particular represents, to some extent, employers' business interests.
Yes.
Business, as I said before, benefits greatly from immigration.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things that immigration does, as I said before, is redistribute wealth from people who compete with immigrants to people who use them.
So you have a pro-immigration alliance or conspiracy even between the politically correct people and the wealthy?
Well, I wouldn't say alliance or conspiracy, but clearly there's a set of interest groups that benefit from immigration.
Yes.
The set of interest groups in the U.S. that are perfectly happy with the way the system is right now.
Yes.
And that's the reason it stays the way it is.
And what you are saying, of course, essentially is that the politicians, both in the U.S. and here, should be open about what they want an immigration policy to do.
Yeah. In the U.S., like in many other countries, I think, actually, perhaps even in Denmark, people tend to debate over peripheral issues to the core of the debate. If you think about the core of the debate has to answer two questions.
Yes.
How many immigrants would a country want to admit? It could be open the borders or not. And which kinds of immigrants will a country want to admit? Would it be what skill composition? High skill, low skill? Will it be an anti-poverty program? Will it be a program to increase economic growth? And what is the skill composition for the immigrants?
Yes.
To answer those two questions, a politician or a policymaker has to first answer a more moral question, which is, what does a country want to accomplish from immigration? For example, if a country says to itself, we want immigration policy to serve the needs of poor people from all over the world. So we want basically immigration policy to be an anti-poverty program. Well, that leads to a particular set of policy tools.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, a country says, we want immigration to increase the per capita income of people already here, that leads to another set of policy tools.
Yeah.
A country, therefore, the electoral process has to lead to an answer to the question, what kind of immigration policy should we pursue in the sense of who it is that we want to benefit? The problem is, to answer that question requires politicians to come out and actually say what it is they feel about it.
Yeah. And also, of course, to make it clear to those people with fewer skills and lower wages that they will be under pressure.
That somebody will have to pay for whatever policy we pursue, somebody has to pay the price.
Yes.
One important thing that economics teaches about immigration, which I'm making the point in my book, is that not everybody can gain. There are some people who are going to gain a lot, people are going to lose.
Yes.
And the question, once you choose a policy, you choose a particular set of winners and losers.
And to persuade the losers from immigration that they should accept that they will have to be compensated, and thus the cost is moved to somebody else.
Precisely.
All right, here towards the very end, I mean, you mentioned right at the beginning that in the US, of course, there's been the fact of illegal immigration taking place over the past 10 years.
Correct.
Now, some people will say, well, basically, the reason that these issues aren't debated in the US today is that the politicians have given up. The population has essentially accepted the fact that immigration will take place, whether legally or illegally. This is how it's going to work, and this is how it's going to be, and the politicians are powerless to do anything about it.
I would rephrase it differently. I would say the politicians have decided the way the system is now is just fine with them. For example, illegal immigration is itself a policy. We've decided willingly to look the other way when they enter the country.
Yes.
I mean, we decided not to enforce existing laws.
Yes.
And that itself is a policy tool, a policy choice that was made.
Yes.
So the argument people often make, we're going to have illegal immigration no matter what, is really not quite right. We're going to have illegal immigration no matter what right now because we've decided to have illegal immigration the way it is right now because some people benefit.
Are you sure that you are not just an economist who has a naive and romantic view of how much power the politicians in fact still have?
I don't know, okay? I mean, I tend to think that in the case of illegal immigration in particular, I tend to think that if the U.S. really wanted to address the problem, there are many policy choices that could be made to actually address the problem.
Right.
And the fact that we haven't done so indicates to me that they're happy with the way it is.
All right. Professor Borjas, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.